Episode 7 Where There Is a Will. What, asked Linrem, makes a will mage strong? The pair were strolling through the meadow that surrounded the chateau. A week had passed since they had discussed Eridan. As the sun climbed steadily across the sky, the early morning began to heat towards midday. This had marked one of the many changes in Ravenau's daily schedule. Every morning, long before the sun even began to show on the horizon, Linrem woke Ravenau to attempt the pinwheel. After he spent an hour or so cartwheeling his arms to keep from falling, and a profuse sweat had broken out across his body, he would climb down, and then Linrem would sit in the little handcart and have Ravenau pull it as fast as he could manage, in circuits around the outside of the walls of the chateau. Once he could no longer maintain a trot and struggled to pull the cart at a walk, Lin would then clamber out of the cart and have Ravenau pull it some more, until he could no longer do that much. Once Ravenau was sufficiently exhausted, Linrem would let him catch his breath, and then they would begin pacing around the chateau, talking theory, as they were now. This typically progressed until lunchtime, and Ravenau still had some time to go. Ravenau thought about the question Lin posed him. It had the feeling of a trick question, but Ravenau knew better. At this stage in his training, Lin didn't ask trick questions, but he did ask questions that required tricky answers. And this one certainly had the earmarks of requiring a more nuanced response. He thought back on his lessons from the past few weeks, as well as the long hours of theory taught in Lin's office. There were definitely several ways of answering this question, and Ravenau had a sinking feeling that despite the solutions that came to mind, he did not know the response his master was seeking. "That is a difficult question to answer, Master," Ravenau began, "for there are many things that make a will mage strong." "Such as?" Lin prodded. "Well," Ravenau continued, "let's start with physical strength. Though being incredibly strong of body isn't strictly a requirement of will casting, those with a feeble vessel are hindered by it, and that is reflected in the array of castings they are capable of, which would be far less than one of a strong body." Linrem nodded sagely, taking in Ravenau's response, but saying nothing himself. Ravenau went on. "Next would be strength of mind, or mental fortitude. That's where the namesake of the magic comes from, will. You must have determination and a desire to carry out whatever it is that you want with ironclad will." Again, Linrem said nothing, just nodded and cast sideways glances at Ravenau, with a knowing grin pulling up the corner of his mouth. Ravenau sputtered. "I guess the last thing would be the caster's well, the depth and width of which provides the raw power for the castings we aim to master, and without which we would either perish attempting to cast or never be able of castings at all." Linrem nodded more, pursing his lips. "All good answers," he said thoughtfully. "Not the answers I was looking for, per se, but all good answers nonetheless." When Linrem said nothing more, Ravenau waited for several long moments, the silence only broken by the sounds of their feet made sliding through the short golden grasses native to this valley. It became clear to Ravenau that Linrem would not continue or say anything else. He could be such an impossibly difficult old man at times. Sighing deeply and rubbing his face with one hand, Ravenau spoke. "Are you going to tell me?" "Hmm?" Lin said, jerking his head as if he had been snatched from a particularly intense web of thought. "What's that now?" "Are you going to tell me the answer you were looking for?" Rabineau repeated exasperately. Oh, Lynn said, as if the thought hadn't even occurred to him. No. The silence dragged on. Sighing again, Rabineau asked, Can you give me a clue? Must I? It would be incredibly helpful. Oh, fine, if you insist. Lynn began stroking his beard pensively. He maintained his silence for several long moments before he finally came up with a clue. It is something that neither you or Eridan possess, currently, though it is not necessarily difficult to find. I possess it, but it's only relevant in regards to a very limited number of subjects. Though it is not something I believe you currently possess, I have faith that you can and will find it. Rabineau stared at Linram, no humor in his expression. That was so cryptic, he shot at Lynn, that you might as well have said nothing at all. And yet, Lynn said with a twinkle in his eye, you asked, and I provided. How do you figure? Rabineau snorted. I asked for a clue, and you gave me a riddle. That's like answering a question with a question. Sure, you can do it, but it's rude as hell. Not really, Linram pondered. I've actually given you the answer. You just have to figure out the riddle first. You're impossible. Excuse me. Linram chuckled. You're not the first person to call me that. I'm certainly glad you agree. So you enjoy being a massive pain in my ass? Oh, I wouldn't put it that way, Lynn replied with a grin. I'd say I'm being massively successful at my job. Rabineau snorted again. Which is? He asked with derision dripping from his voice. Your teacher, of course. Lynn looked at him innocently. I mean, what other job do I have that pertains to you? That was an easy one, really. A simple process of elimination would have done wonders for you there. Rabineau took a deep breath to calm the rising irritation at his master's antics. Really, the old man was right. He just had an incredibly grating way of pointing it out. Okay, fine, he said, trying to get back on topic. So you've already given me the answer via this riddle of yours. Something I don't have but am capable of getting. Something you have but only pertains to a limited number of subjects. Just those two clues alone make me think that it's going to be something ridiculous like valor or love or respect. Something ethereal. Am I getting close, Master? Linram said nothing, but his lips pursed together into a thin line, as if he were trying to smother a grin. Rabineau sagged and looked at the old man with narrowed eyes. I just said it, didn't I? It was one of those three. I said nothing to give you such a notion. Oh, hells, Rabineau said. It's love, isn't it? Linram stopped dead in his tracks and looked at Rabineau blankly for a long moment. He then burst into laughter, cackling so hard that he doubled over and put his hands on his knees. Lynn heaved a few breaths, shedding his mirth, and stood upright, back to being serious. I really must try harder when giving you riddles. Linram wiped tears from his eyes and continued walking again. Rabineau sighed deeply, closing his eyes for a second. Fun and games aside, Master, he pinched the bridge of his nose. How in the hells does love make a will made strong? Linram opened his mouth to answer, but Rabineau bowled forward. And please don't give me some nonsense like strengthen your relationship with all living things, expand the love you have within you, and anything becomes possible. Linram laughed loudly at this. Because that's bullshit, and I need an actual weapon if I'm going to stand up to Eridan. I wouldn't say that's bullshit, Lynn shrugged, but to each their own. However, that particular globule of wisdom wouldn't have been my response. To answer your question, honestly, it's hard to say. I literally just asked you to drop the bullshit, Rabineau said in flat tones, no amusement on his face. Lynn chuckled. Easy, boy, easy. The old man reached into his robes and produced his pipe, which he began puffing away at. It's hard to say exactly how love makes will magic more powerful, just as it's hard to say exactly how much will it is going to take to cast a particular working. The truth is, no one really knows. But the proof is in the pudding, as they say, and oh my, do I love pudding. Master, Rabineau chastised, please stay on track. Fine, fine. Linram scowled and flittered his hand in the way that he did to show he was irritated. Never let me have any fun. Anyways, where was I? He paused for a second, glancing up at the clear blue skies, puffing on his pipe and stroking his beard wistfully. Ah, yes, the proof. Perhaps without the pudding this time, but proof nonetheless. Here it is, Rabbit. Love, when applied to castings in the same way we apply our will, has quite the astonishing effect. The casting, if done properly, will be immeasurably stronger than the same casting done without the application of love. You have got to be shitting me, Rabineau groaned. Shit you, I do not, Linram said with glee. It is much along the same lines of reasoning as a parent being capable of lifting a fallen tree limb off of their child, despite being unable to move such a weight had the life of their child not been on the line. Do you follow? No, Rabineau said flatly. Linram sighed. Allow me to put it this way, Rabbit. Had any other mage of equal or greater power attempted the web of tracking that I have constructed for Eredin, even if they had every single piece currently incorporated into mine, my web would still be stronger and more effective than any other, simply because my desire to find out what my son was doing fueled that magic. And what else would such a desire be fueled upon other than my love for my offspring? This made Rabineau pause, frowning and regarding his master. So you're saying the only reason it actually works is because you love Eredin? Precisely, Linram answered. And even still, with Raquel in hand, Eredin has the ability to nearly completely shut me out. Wait, something occurred to Rabineau. That's why Raquel is so strong, and why it amplifies Eredin so greatly. All signs of mirth and mischief vanished from the old man. You made Raquel with love. For 100 years you poured your attention into the sword. You probably had Eredin on your mind at many times throughout the process, maybe even fantasized about one day giving Eredin the sword, as a father hands down priceless heirlooms to keep them in the family. Hells, Rabineau breathed softly. If that's the case, then you practically handed the most powerful will mage besides yourself a super weapon. Rabineau stopped talking when he saw the tears streaming down Linram's face. Lin nodded, slowly and full of sorrow. Correct you are, Rabbit, he said. I've had many, many years to contemplate just how potent a weapon I created for him. Part of me questions whether or not I actually did make it for him, or if he somehow managed to influence me to do it for him. Linram shrugged and blew his nose into the sleeve of his robe. However, that train of thought leads nowhere productive. He turned and slapped a hand onto Rabineau's shoulder. We need to figure out how to imbue your castings with love, my boy. But wait, Rabineau said, a thought coming to him. If it's something that's simple, then Eredin can just as easily do it, making the whole thing pointless. Linram laughed at Rabineau, though there was no mirth in his voice. You clearly need more life experience, Rabbit. Rabineau scowled and opened his mouth to reply, but Linram raised his hand to silence him. The use of love in will casting is incredibly rare and stunningly difficult to apply. I would argue that it is akin to knowing oneself to master will expenditures, and love is even more unwieldy. Okay, so it's super hard to use, Rabineau said, but you're dismissing Eredin here. I don't understand how you can be so confident that your own son is incapable of love. Linram stopped walking and looked at Rabineau intensely. You know not of what you speak of, Rabbit. You make it sound like it's impossible to love, and that's just ridiculous, Rabbit, Linram said sternly, cutting off his apprentice. Aridin is heartless, cold, calculating, and he has always been that way since the day I took him from the steppes. Do you think the nomadic peoples of the north showered little Aridin with love? His mother practically abandoned the tribe to go run off with some mage for years, only to return alone and bloated with child. She dies in childbirth, and now the tribe has one more mouth to feed and less hands to feed them. Yes, they cared for Aridin, but no one loved him. He was tolerated. Even after I took him away from the tribe, it was already too late. I don't think Aridin has ever felt love. Only power. Master, Rabineau asked softly, how the fuck am I supposed to defeat him? For now, Linram answered, his eyes meeting Rabineau's, you need only survive. That's about as helpful as giving me an umbrella indoors and saying, stay dry, little rabbit. Rabineau scowled at his master. Considering that your spawn has become an existential threat not only for me and every other living will mage, but also all of Galita, possibly all of the civilized world. Rabineau paused and took a steadying breath. Can you please be a little more helpful? I could use way more practical advice than stay alive. Linram sighed and seemed to deflate slightly. You must understand, Rabbit, he said morosely. I'm doing all that I can. Every piece of advice, every insight into Aridin you glean from me is a stark betrayal of Riza and all that I love, and all the love I have had for her. His face looked more pain than Rabineau had ever seen it. I know that Riza would likely encourage me to do what I'm doing, to protect the world from our son. But part of me thinks she might have joined Aridin, helping him bathe the world in blood. Lynn had stopped walking, was staring at the ground, with the glazed-over look that Rabineau knew meant he was leagues away from the grassy field around Twilight Chateau. Silence claimed the moment. Only a soft breeze caressing their skin broke the stillness. Rabineau took a hesitant step towards Linram. Master, he began, but then he faltered. There was so much that could be said, so many reassurances, speculations, guesses, even bold-faced lies that could help the old man feel marginally better about the situation. But none of those niceties would keep Aridin from ripping Rabineau's meat from his bones like a perfectly cooked roast. Instead, he chose the hard road. You can't focus on the past and all that could have been. This is what is now. And we have to reckon with that. I have to reckon with that. And really, it was you that put me into this situation by taking me on as an apprentice. So quit with the self-pity and help me survive my future encounters with your deranged and incredibly dangerous son. Linram chuckled and smiled, looking up at Rabineau with tear-rimmed eyes. Right you are, my boy. Right you are. Hours later, after the pair had taken lunch, Linram took Rabineau out to a quiet patch of forest, far enough into the woods that the sensory input from the chateau was pushed away by the sights, sounds, and smells of the forest. Linram walked until he found a large boulder sitting amongst the foliage like a massive stone egg. Lin focused on the boulder, brought his hands before his face, palms pressed together like he was trying to squish a bug between them. After a long, drawn-out moment of silence, Lin touched the tips of both hands to his forehead before making contact with his third eye. Rabineau instantly felt the power rippling through the air, palpable like salt on the wind when one approached the ocean. There was so much will radiating through the space around them that Rabineau could feel it brushing along his skin. Never had Rabineau seen his master flaunt such power before. Suddenly, with a swift and precise motion, Linrim sliced his right arm like a sword, perfectly horizontal, and aimed square in the middle of the boulder. There was a whoosh, like the air being displaced by two massive objects, and a slight thud, almost like the sound a book makes when being forcibly closed. Then, before his very eyes, Linrim brought his hands back, palms together, then opened them as if they were hinged on bottom, spreading his hands until both palms were facing up. But his pinky fingers and the sides of his hands were still pressed firmly together. As he did this, the boulder followed suit, almost as if the old mage was showing the boulder how to do it. Slowly, the top half of the boulder separated just as Linram's hands did, and softly plopped to the ground next to the bottom half, both flat sides now facing up. Linrim sagged as he released the magic. The palpable sense of will in the air vanished as soon as it had come, leaving only a giddy memory in its wake. Rabineau looked at what his master had done with awe. The old mage had cut the massive boulder in half, and then lay the second half next to the first. "How?" Rabineau asked, breathless. "In the hells did you do that?" Linrim only grinned roguishly. "Very carefully, Rabbit. Very carefully indeed." "But that was incredible!" Rabineau continued wide-eyed. Linrim held up his hand to silence Rabineau, nodding slightly while he did so. Yes, I know that was very cool and all," he said, very much sounding bored with what he had just done. "But that is not what we are here to accomplish." Rabineau frowned. "Are you sure? Because you just cut a boulder in half like it was paper." "Nothing more than a parlor trick." Linrim waved his hand dismissively. "What we're here for will be far more beneficial to your magic." Rabineau took a moment to take in their surroundings, carefully examining the forest around them. "Is this going to be some sort of obstacle course, or maybe a scavenger hunt?" Linrim shook his head. "No," he said. "It's—" Oh! Rabineau cut him off excitedly. "A survival challenge!" Linrim frowned. "No," he said. I got it!" Rabineau snapped his fingers. "I'm supposed to hunt something!" Linrim's frown deepened to a scowl and irritation. "No," he said slowly. You want me to fix the stone?" Rabineau scratched his head, oblivious to his master's growing aggravation. "Don't know why you would have cut it in half in the first place, but then again, that wouldn't be the first time." "No!" Linrim said, stamping his foot and balling his fists at his side like an irate 2-year-old. "Let me finish, damn it!" Rabineau clamped his mouth shut and regarded his master with a look of abashed amusement and anticipation. Linrim took a breath, straightening his tunic and affixing his apprentice with a scowl. He opened his mouth to continue, paused, and just blew out a breath. "Bah!" he said. "You ruined it." "Oh, come on, master," Rabineau pleaded. "I'm sorry. My lips are sealed, and I'm dying with anticipation. Please, tell me why you brought me here." Linrim crossed his arms across his chest and narrowed his eyes at Rabineau. "Oh, I'm sure you are." Rabineau opened his mouth to reply, then seemed to think better of it, closing it a moment later and merely smiling at his master. Lin let the silence drag on for several long, uncomfortable moments, before he finally broke it. "Fine," he said. "Just shut up and listen." Linrim walked the short distance between himself and the now splayed open halves of the boulder. He examined the cut and ran a finger along the surface and edge. "As you know already," he began, "I'm endeavoring to imbue your will magic with love, and I hope to do it in such a way that your castings will be intrinsically more powerful than ever before." Lin turned back to Rabineau and beckoned him towards the boulder. When his apprentice had covered the short distance, he continued, I brought you here, to the middle of the forest, so that you may grow to understand nature and how will plays a part in it. Rabineau frowned and opened his mouth, but Lin raised a silencing hand once more. Your task, he said, is to sit here in the woods until you can hear the lamenting of the stone.